Jake Morrison pushed through the crowded hallways of Kepler Station. His old leather jacket looked out of place among all the shiny alien clothes. The 24-year-old human was sweating as he walked. His hands were shaking because he was nervous. Today was the day he would spend every credit he owned. The auction hall was huge. Hundreds of alien traders filled the seats. Their strange voices echoed off the metal walls as they talked about the ships for sale. Jake had never seen so many. Different species in one place? There were tall blue Altarians with their long necks, short green vegans with their big eyes, gray Zentrans with their 4 arms. They all looked rich and important. Jake felt very small among them. He was just a mechanic who fixed broken things on the station. Most days he worked in the engine rooms, crawling through tight spaces to repair damaged systems. His clothes were always dirty with grease and oil. The other workers called him crazy because he spent all his free time reading about old warships. The auction master was a tall Altarian with golden skin. He spoke in a voice that carried across the entire hall. Welcome to today's ship auction. We have many fine vessels for sale. Luxury cruisers, cargo ships, and passenger liners. All in excellent condition. Jake was not interested in those ships. He had come here for one reason only. Lot 847, the ship that nobody wanted. He had first seen the destroyer 3 weeks ago. It was sitting in the station's scrapyard, forgotten, and alone. The ship was called a Vanguard-class destroyer. It had been built by the Altarian Defense Force 15 years ago. 3 years ago, it had been in a big battle against pirates. The pirates had won. The ship had been badly damaged and left to die. Jake had walked around the ship many times. He had studied every burn mark on its hull. He had looked at the empty weapon mounts where guns used to be. He had seen the holes in the armor where enemy fire had punched through. Most people would have seen junk. Jake saw potential. The ship was 200 meters long. It had been designed to fight fast and hit hard. Its engines were bigger than most ships, twice its size. Its armor was thick and strong. The hull was made of a special metal that could take a lot of punishment. Even damaged, Jake could see that. This ship had been built to survive. The auction continued for hours. Jake watched as beautiful ships sold for millions of credits. A Centauri luxury yacht went for $8 million. A vegan cargo hauler sold for $12 million. The buyers were all wealthy corporations and rich traders. They barely looked at the prices before bidding. Jake felt the small bag of credits in his pocket. 12,000 credits. It was everything he had saved in 5 years of working. Most of the ships here cost more than he would make in his entire life. Finally, the auction master reached the end of his list. Now we come to our final lot. Number 847, one Altarian Vanguard-class destroyer. This ship has been classified as salvage only. The hull has multiple breaches. The engines are seized. All weapon systems have been removed. The life support systems are not functional. We recommend this ship for scrap metal only. The hull became quiet. Jake could hear his heart beating. This was his moment. Do I hear any bids for this vessel? The auction master asked. He sounded bored. Everyone knew nobody would want this ship. Jake stood up. His voice cracked as he spoke. 12,000 credits. The hall erupted in noise. Aliens turned to look at him. Some were laughing. Others were shaking their heads. A few were pointing at him and talking in their own languages. Jake heard one of the Zentrans say, "Humans are so stupid, they think they can fix anything." A vegan merchant was laughing. That boy will be lucky to sell it for scrap in a month. The auction master looked surprised. He had clearly not expected any bids. Do I hear any other bids? No? Going once, going twice. Sold to the human for 12,000 credits. Jake felt his legs go weak. He had done it. The ship was his dot as he walked down to complete the purchase. More aliens stared at him. Most of them were not friendly looks. A group of Orion traders was whispering and pointing. Jake caught some of their words. They were saying that humans were too emotional, that they made bad decisions based on feelings instead of logic. Jake ignored them all. He had heard these things before. Humans had only been part of the galactic community for 50 years. Many aliens still thought they were primitive. They thought humans were good for simple labor, but not much else. The purchase took an hour to complete. Jake had to sign many forms. He had to prove he had the money. He had to agree to move the ship within 30 days. When it was finally done, he was given a small metal card. It was the ship's ownership certificate. Jake walked back to the scrapyard alone. The area was quiet now. Most of the workers had gone home. Only a few security lights lit the way. The destroyer sat in the same spot where it had been for 3 years. Now it belonged to him. He walked up to the ship's main entrance. The door was sealed shut. The control panel was dark. Jake pulled out his tools and began working on the lock. It took him 20 minutes to get it open. The door moved slowly, making a grinding sound. Inside, the ship was dark and cold. Jake turned on his flashlight. The beam showed empty corridors and broken equipment. The air smelled old and stale. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. Jake walked through the ship's main deck. His footsteps echoed in the empty halls. He passed the crew quarters where soldiers had once slept. He saw the command center where officers had given orders. He found the engine room where the ship's heart had once beat with power. Everything was broken. The walls had holes. The floors were covered with debris. Wires hung from the ceiling like dead snakes. It would take months to fix everything? Maybe years, but Jake smiled as he explored his new ship. Other people saw junk. He saw home. He found the captain's quarters at the front of the ship. The room was small but had a good view of space through a cracked window. Jake sat down on the old chair and looked out at the stars. Tomorrow he would start work. He would fix the power systems. First, then the life support, then the engines. One system at a time. One day at a time. The other humans on the station thought he was crazy. The aliens thought he was stupid. But Jake knew something they did not. He had read about ships like this. He had studied their designs. He knew that Vanguard-class destroyers were tough. They were built to take damage and keep fighting. This ship had been in a battle and lost. But it had not been destroyed. It had survived. That meant something. Jake looked around the dark command center. He could imagine it filled with light and sound again. He could see the displays showing star charts and battle plans. He could hear the hum of the engines and the voices of the crew. It would happen. He would make it happen. The ship needed a name. Jake thought about it for a long time. Finally, he decided he would call her Phoenix. Like the bird in the old Earth stories that rose from ashes to fly again, the Phoenix would fly again. Jake promised himself that as he sat in the dark ship, she would fly and she would be beautiful. Jake woke up on the cold metal floor of the Phoenix. His back hurt from sleeping on the hard surface. It had been his home for 2 weeks now. The station manager had given him permission to live on the ship while he fixed it. Jake had no money. Left for an apartment anyway. He rolled up his sleeping bag and put it in the corner. The ship was still dark and cold. The life support systems were broken. Jake had to wear his thick jacket even inside the ship. His breath made small clouds in the cold air. The first thing Jake did every morning was check his list. He had written down everything that needed to be fixed. The list was very long. It covered 3 pages of paper. Every day he crossed off the things he had finished. Every day he added new problems to the list. Today he would work on the power system. The ship's main power core was completely dead. Jake had spent the last week taking it apart. The core was the size of a small room. It had thousands of parts. Many of them were broken or missing. Jake climbed down into the engine room. His flashlight beam showed the open power core. Parts were scattered everywhere. He had organized them into groups. Good parts in one pile, broken parts in another. Missing parts on his shopping list. The hardest part was getting a replacement. Parts. The Phoenix was an old Altarian ship. Human stores did not sell Altarian parts. Jake had to trade his services for what he needed. He worked as a mechanic around the station during the day. Other ship owners paid him to fix their engines and systems. Jake was good at fixing things. He could make old parts work like new ones. He could combine parts from different ships to make something better, but instead of taking money, Jake asked for parts. A plasma coil from a broken freighter, a power converter from a scrapped shuttle, a control circuit from a damaged fighter. Slowly, he was building a collection of parts that might work in the Phoenix. The work was hard and dangerous. Jake had to crawl through tight spaces inside the ship. Sometimes he worked in areas where the artificial gravity was broken. He would float in the air while trying to connect wires and circuits. The ship's computer systems were the worst problem. The original Altarian computers had been destroyed in the battle. Jake could not read Altarian code anyway. He had to install a human computer system instead. Jake had bought an old navigation computer from a scrapped Earth transport. It was 10 years old but still worked. He spent 3 days installing it in the Phoenix's command center. The computer was too small for a ship this size, but it was better than nothing. Other humans on the station thought Jake was crazy, but some of them helped him anyway. Lisa Chin worked in the cargo bay. She brought Jake food when he forgot to eat. She also helped him move heavy parts around the ship. Ben Rodriguez worked in the communications center. He was good with electronics. He helped Jake figure out how to connect human computers to Altarian systems. Ben also translated the old Altarian repair manuals for Jake. Danny Walsh was a welder. He helped Jake patch the holes in the ship's hull. There were dozens of holes where enemy weapons had punched through the armor. Each hole had to be carefully sealed. Danny taught Jake how to weld the special metal that Altarian ships were made of. The work took months. Jake worked 18 hours. Every day, his hands were always covered in grease and cuts. His clothes were torn and dirty. He lost weight because he forgot to eat. But slowly, very slowly, the Phoenix began to change. The first victory came after 6 weeks. Jake managed to get emergency power working. A few lights came on in the command center. The computer screens flickered to life. Jake almost cried when he saw the first display light up. With power, he could run diagnostic tests. The computer could tell him what was broken and what was working. The news was not good. Almost everything needed repair or replacement. But at least now Jake knew exactly what he was dealing with. The life support system took another month. Jake had to rebuild the air recyclers and the water purifiers. He had to fix the heating system and the artificial gravity generators. When he finally got it working, the ship felt warm for the first time in years. The aliens who worked on the station started to notice the changes. At first, they had laughed at Jake. They made jokes about the crazy human who thought he could fix a dead warship. But as weeks passed, they stopped laughing. They could see lights in the Phoenix's windows. They could hear the hum of working machinery. They could smell the clean air coming from the ship's vents. Some of them started to watch Jake work. They were curious about his methods. Jake did not fix things the way Altarians did. He did not follow the official repair procedures. He mixed parts from different manufacturers. He used human tools on alien systems. He created solutions that no engineer had ever thought of. Commander Vex was the station's chief engineer. He was an old Altarian with gray skin and wise eyes. He had been fixing ships for 40 years. At first, he thought Jake was a fool. But as time passed, he became interested in Jake's work. "Your methods are very strange," Vex said one day. He was watching Jake install a human power coupling in an Altarian engine. "Maybe," Jake replied. He did not stop working, but they work. "Why? Do you mix different technologies? It is not safe?" "It is not standard." Jake looked up from his work. "Standard methods did not work. The standard parts were too expensive. So I found a different way." Vex studied the connection Jake had made. It was ugly, but it was solid. The human and Altarian systems were talking to each other perfectly. "This should not work," Vex said. "But it does," Jake said. He tested the connection again. All the readings were good. Vex nodded slowly. "Yes, it does." The engines were the biggest challenge. The Phoenix had 2 main engines and 4 maneuvering thrusters. All of them were seized solid. Jake had to take them completely apart and rebuild them from scratch. The work took 3 months. Jake had to learn how Altarian engines worked. He Had to understand their fuel systems and control circuits. He had to figure out how to make them work with human computers. The first time Jake tried to start the engines, nothing happened. The second time, one engine coughed and died. The third time, both engines rumbled to life for 30 seconds before shutting down, but on the fourth try, both engines started and kept running. The Phoenix shook and vibrated as power flowed through her systems. Jake could feel the ship coming. Alive around him, the aliens in the maintenance bay stopped what they were doing. They stared at the Phoenix in amazement. They had never seen a human accomplish something like this. The ship that had been dead for 3 years was breathing again. Jake stood in the command center and watched the engine readings on his screens. Everything looked good. The power output was steady. The fuel consumption was normal. The temperature readings were within safe limits. He had done it. Against all odds, he had brought the Phoenix back to life, but Jake was not finished. The ship could generate power and maintain life support. Her engines could run, but she still could not fly. There were hundreds of other systems that needed repair. Navigation, communications, shields, sensors, and dozens of other critical systems. Jake looked at his list again. He had crossed off many items, but there were still 2 full pages of work left. It would take months more to get the Phoenix ready for space, but Jake was not discouraged. He had proven that the impossible was possible. He had shown the galaxy that humans did not give up. He had turned a piece of junk into a living ship. The Phoenix was ready for the next stage of her resurrection. Jake stood in the Phoenix's command center and stared at the flight control panel. After 8 months of work, this was the moment he had been waiting for. The ship was ready for her first flight in 3 years. The Phoenix was not perfect. Many systems still needed work. The navigation computer was old and slow. The artificial gravity sometimes flickered on and off. The weapon systems were still empty holes in the hull. But she could fly. That was what mattered. Jake had spent the last week running final checks on all systems. The engines were running smoothly. The life support was working perfectly. The shield generators were operating at 60% power. It was not ideal, but it was enough for a simple test flight. He had filed a flight plan with station control. A basic orbit around Kepler Station, nothing fancy. Just a chance to see how the Phoenix handled in space. Jake had been dreaming of this moment for months. The command center door opened behind him. Jake turned to see a woman in a crisp blue uniform. She was tall and had short brown hair. Her uniform had the symbols of the Earth Defense Force. "Mr. Morrison?" she asked. "I'm Captain Kate Sullivan of the EDF transport vessel Endeavor. I'd like to speak with you." Jake nodded. He had heard about Captain Sullivan. She was one of the few humans who commanded a military ship in this sector. Her reputation was excellent. "What can I do for you, Captain?" Kate looked around the command center. Her eyes widened as she saw the mixed human and Altarian systems. "I've been hearing stories about what you've accomplished here. I had to see it for myself." "It's not much to look at," Jake said, "but she runs." "That's exactly what concerns me," Kate said. "Mr. Morrison, this ship wasn't designed for human crew. The acceleration couches are built for Altarian bodies. The control interfaces are calibrated for their vision. The emergency systems won't recognize human life signs." Jake had thought about these problems. He had spent weeks modifying the ship's systems. The command chair now had human-sized cushions. The control screens showed information in human-readable formats. The medical scanners had been reprogrammed to monitor human vital signs. "I've made adjustments," Jake said. "The ship can handle a human crew now." Kate examined the modifications Jake had made. She was impressed, despite her concerns. "You've done remarkable work. But flying an alien warship alone is dangerous. What if something goes wrong?" "And then I'll fix it," Jake said simply. Kate studied Jake's face. She could see the determination in his eyes. This young man had already accomplished the impossible. Maybe he could handle whatever came next. "I'll be monitoring your flight from the Endeavor," Kate said. "If you run into trouble, call for help immediately." Jake nodded. "Thank you, Captain." After Kate left, Jake began his pre-flight checklist. He started the engines and watched the power levels climb. He activated the shield generators and felt the familiar hum of energy fields around the ship. He checked the navigation system and plotted his course. Station control gave him clearance to depart. Jake's hands were shaking as he reached for the flight controls. This was it. After all these months of work, the Phoenix was finally going to fly. He engaged the engine slowly. The Phoenix lifted off from the docking platform with a gentle rumble. Jake felt the acceleration push him back into his chair. The ship responded to his commands perfectly. As they cleared the station's gravity field, Jake increased power to the engines. The Phoenix accelerated smoothly toward their planned orbit. Through the viewports, Jake could see Kepler Station growing smaller behind them. The flight was everything Jake had hoped for. The Phoenix handled like a dream. She was fast and responsive. Her engines had more power than Jake had expected. When he pushed the throttles forward, the ship leaped ahead with surprising speed. Jake ran the Phoenix through a series of basic maneuvers: turns, climbs, dives, and rolls. The ship responded to every command instantly. She was not just flying. She was dancing. After an hour of testing, Jake was ready to return to the station. He had proven that the Phoenix was spaceworthy. Now he could begin planning for longer flights, maybe even trips to other systems. But as Jake turned toward home, his communications system crackled to life. An urgent message was coming from station control. All ships in the Kepler system, this is station control. We have a priority alert. Unknown vessels have been detected at the edge of the system. They are approaching at high speed. All civilian traffic is advised to remain close to the station. Jake checked his sensors. He could see the unknown ships on his display: 3 destroyers and 1 heavy cruiser. They were moving fast and in formation. This was not a merchant convoy or a patrol fleet. This was a raiding force. Jake had heard about the Ravagers. They were pirates who attacked shipping lanes and remote stations. They had been growing bolder in recent months. But Jake had never expected them to attack a major station like Kepler. The Phoenix's communication system buzzed again. This time, the message was from Captain Sullivan. "Phoenix, this is Captain Sullivan. Return to the station immediately. We have a hostile fleet approaching." Jake looked at his tactical display. The Ravager ships would reach the station in 2 hours. Kepler Station had some defensive platforms, but they were old and weak. The small patrol fleet stationed there would be no match for 3 destroyers and a cruiser. Jake thought about the thousands of people living and working on the station. Many of them had been kind to him during the past months. Lisa Chung, who had brought him food; Ben Rodriguez, who had helped him with the computers; Danny Walsh, who had taught him to weld; Commander Vex, who had come to respect his work. They would all be in danger when the Ravagers arrived. Jake checked the Phoenix's weapons systems. The gun mounts were still empty. The missile launchers had been stripped out years ago. The ship had no way to fight back against armed enemies, but as Jake studied his displays, he realized something important. The Phoenix might not have weapons, but she had other advantages. She was fast. She was maneuverable. She was tough. And most importantly, she was completely unexpected. The Ravagers would not be expecting a functional warship to emerge from what they thought was a helpless station. They would be focused on easy targets: cargo ships, passenger liners, and civilian transports. They would not be ready for a surprise attack. Jake made his decision. He opened a channel to Station Control. "Station Control, this is Jake Morrison. Aboard the Phoenix, I'm moving to intercept the hostile fleet." "Negative, Phoenix. Your ship is not armed and you are not military personnel. Return to the station immediately." "Sorry, Control. I can't do that." Jake cut the communication and pushed the Phoenix's engines to maximum power. The ship surged forward with incredible speed. Jake had never pushed the engines this hard before. The power readings climbed into the red zone, but the engines held steady. On his sensors, Jake could see the Ravager fleet spreading out as they approached the station. Their fighters were launching from the destroyers. Soon they would begin. Their attack runs on the defensive platforms. Jake had maybe 30 minutes before the shooting started. 30 minutes to figure out how to fight 3 destroyers and a cruiser with an unarmed ship. The Phoenix might not have weapons, but she had mass, she had speed, and she had armor. Jake began to form a plan. It was crazy and dangerous. It would probably get him killed, but it was the only chance the station had. Jake gripped the flight controls and aimed the Phoenix at the nearest Ravager destroyer. If he was going to die, he would die fighting. The Phoenix had been built for war. Today, she would remember her purpose. The young human mechanic and his restored warship raced toward battle. Behind them, thousands of lives hung in the balance. Ahead of them, the enemy waited. The Phoenix was about to show the galaxy what humans could do when they refused to surrender. The Ravager fleet reached Kepler Station's outer defenses exactly 2 hours after they were first detected. Jake watched from the Phoenix as enemy fighters swept down on the station's defensive platforms. Bright flashes of laser fire lit up the darkness of space. The station's defenses were old and weak. The orbital platforms had been built 20 years ago. Their shields failed quickly under the enemy attack. One by one, the defensive guns went silent. Jake counted 12 Ravager fighters. In the first wave, they moved in perfect formation, hitting the platforms with surgical precision. Behind them, the 3 destroyers and heavy cruiser advanced steadily toward the station. On his communication system, Jake could hear the panic in the station control center. Commander Harris was trying to coordinate the defense, but there was little he could do. The small patrol fleet of 6 ships was moving to intercept, but they were badly outgunned. "All civilian ships evacuate immediately," Harris ordered over the general frequency. "Repeat, all civilian traffic must leave the system now." Jake watched as dozens of ships began fleeing from the station. Cargo haulers, passenger liners, and private yachts all raced toward the hyperspace jump points. But many of them were too slow to escape. The Ravager fighters had finished with the defensive platforms. Now they turned their attention to the fleeing civilian ships. Jake watched in horror as 2 fighters caught up with a passenger liner. The ship exploded in a ball of fire and debris. More civilian ships were being hunted down. A cargo freighter tried to dodge between asteroids but was cornered by 3 fighters. A family yacht attempted to hide behind the station's communication array, but was spotted and destroyed. Jake gripped his flight controls tighter. Every ship that died represented innocent people, workers who had jobs on the station, families trying to get to safety, traders who were just trying to make a living. The Phoenix was still undetected. Jake had powered down all non-essential systems and was running silent. The Ravagers had not noticed one more ship among all the civilian traffic fleeing the station, but Jake was not fleeing. He was planning. The Phoenix had no weapons, but she had other advantages. She was fast and maneuverable. Her armor was thick and strong. Most importantly, she was completely unexpected. Jake studied the enemy formation. The 3 destroyers were spread out around the station. The heavy cruiser was hanging back, probably planning to move in once the destroyers had cleared the defenses. The fighters were scattered, chasing individual civilian ships. Jake picked his target. The nearest destroyer was focusing its fire on the station's main docking arm. Its captain was probably trying to prevent ships from escaping. The destroyer's shields were up, but they were facing forward toward the station. Jake powered up the Phoenix's engines and began his attack run. He came in from behind and below, where the destroyer's sensors were weakest. The Phoenix's stealth systems were not working perfectly, but they were good enough to hide her approach for a few more minutes. When Jake was only 5 kilometers away, the destroyer finally detected him. Alarms started sounding on the enemy ship. Gun turrets began turning to track the Phoenix, but it was too late. Jake pushed the Phoenix's engines to maximum power and rammed the destroyer at full speed. The impact was tremendous. The Phoenix's armored bow punched through the destroyer's rear shields and smashed into its engine section. Both ships spun wildly through space, locked together by twisted metal. Jake was thrown forward in his command chair. His safety harness cut into his chest. Sparks flew from damaged control panels. The Phoenix's hull groaned under the stress, but it held together. The destroyer was not so lucky. Its engines exploded in a chain reaction. The ship broke apart in the middle, venting atmosphere and debris into space. Jake had just destroyed a warship with a ramming attack, but there was no time to celebrate. The other two destroyers were turning toward the Phoenix. Jake could see their weapon systems charging up. In seconds, they would open fire. Jake fired the Phoenix's maneuvering thrusters and pulled away from the wreckage. The ship was damaged but still flying. Her shields were down to 20% and her port engine was running rough. But she was alive. The second destroyer opened fire with its main guns. Jake threw the Phoenix into a wild, evasive pattern, rolling and diving to avoid the energy beams. Most of the shots missed, but a few clipped the Phoenix's shields. Jake used the station's superstructure as cover. He dove between the massive docking arms and communication arrays, forcing the destroyers to be careful with their aim. They could not risk hitting the station if they wanted to capture it intact. For the next hour, Jake played a deadly game of hide-and-seek. He would dart out from behind cover, distract the enemy ships, then disappear again before they could get a clear shot. The Phoenix's speed and maneuverability kept her alive, but Jake knew he could not keep this up forever. The heavy cruiser was getting tired of the delays. It moved closer to the station and began charging its main weapons. Those guns were powerful enough to destroy the Phoenix with a single hit. Jake's communication system buzzed. It was Captain Sullivan from the Endeavor. "Phoenix, this is Captain Sullivan. What you're doing is incredibly brave, but you need to get out of there." "You can't win against those odds." "I know," Jake replied. "But I've bought some time." "How long until help arrives?" "The nearest fleet is still 4 hours away." "I'm sorry, Jake. There's nothing more you can do." Jake looked at his tactical display. Sullivan was right. The Phoenix had damaged one destroyer and delayed the attack, but the enemy still had overwhelming firepower. Eventually they would corner him and destroy his ship, but Jake had already accomplished something important. His attack had disrupted the Ravager formation. Many of the civilian ships had escaped while the destroyers were focused on him. The station's evacuation was proceeding faster than planned. Jake made his final decision. If he was going to die, he would make it count. He turned the Phoenix toward the heavy cruiser. The massive ship was twice the size of the destroyers. Its shields were powerful and its armor was thick. But Jake had noticed something during the battle. The cruiser's main weapons took a long time to charge between shots. Jake pushed the Phoenix's engines past their safety limits. The ship accelerated toward the cruiser like a missile. Enemy fighters moved to intercept, but Jake was too fast. He weaved between their shots and closed the distance rapidly. The cruiser's captain saw Jake coming. The big ship tried to turn away, but it was too slow and massive to dodge. Its point defense guns opened fire, filling space with deadly energy bolts. Jake felt the Phoenix shudder as enemy fire hit her hull. Armor plating peeled away. Systems failed throughout the ship, but the Phoenix kept flying. Her tough construction was holding together despite the punishment. Just before impact, Jake's communication system crackled one more time. This time the voice was different. It was Admiral Chun of the Earth Defense Force. "Phoenix, this is Admiral Chun aboard the battleship Defiance. We've been monitoring your engagement. Help has arrived." Jake looked at his long-range sensors. Full Earth Defense Force battle group was dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. 6 heavy cruisers, 12 destroyers, and a battleship. The cavalry had arrived just in time. The Ravager fleet saw the new arrivals and immediately began retreating. Their attack on the station was over. They had failed to capture their prize, and now they faced a superior enemy force. Jake pulled the Phoenix away from the cruiser at the last second. He had been ready to ram the ship, but now there was no need. The battle was won. As the Phoenix limped back toward the station, Jake allowed himself to smile. He had saved thousands of lives. He had proven that humans would fight for what was right, even against impossible odds. The Phoenix had found her purpose. She was no longer just a restored warship. She was a symbol of human courage and determination. The galaxy was about to learn what that meant. The Earth Defense Force battle group made quick work of the remaining Ravager ships. Admiral Chun's fleet was modern and well-trained. Within 30 minutes, one Ravager destroyer was destroyed and the others were fleeing toward the hyperspace. Jump points. Jake brought the Phoenix back to Kepler Station slowly. His ship was badly damaged from the battle. The port engine was barely working. The hull had dozens of holes where enemy fire had punched through. Sparks flew from damaged control panels throughout the ship, but the Phoenix was still flying. She had survived her first real battle. As Jake docked at the station, crowds of people were waiting for him. Humans and aliens lined the docking bay. They cheered and applauded as the Phoenix touched down. Jake had never seen anything like it. When Jake opened the ship's airlock, the first person to greet him was Lisa Chun. She had tears in her eyes as she hugged him. "You crazy fool," she said. "You could have been killed." "But I wasn't," Jake replied with a tired smile. Ben Rodriguez and Danny Walsh were there too, along with Commander Vex and dozens of other station workers. Even some of the alien traders, who had laughed at Jake during the auction, were there. They looked at him with new respect. Admiral Chun arrived an hour later. He was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes. He had fought in many battles during his long career, but he had never seen anything quite like what Jake had done. "Mr. Morrison," the Admiral said, "that was some of the most creative ship handling I've ever witnessed. Have you considered a career in the Defense Force?" Jake had thought about it, but he had a different idea forming in his mind. "Thank you, Admiral, but I think I can serve better in a different way." Admiral Chun raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" Jake looked at the Phoenix. His ship was damaged but not broken. With proper repairs, she could be even better than before. And there were other ships like her scattered across the galaxy. Old warships that had been abandoned or forgotten. Ships that could be restored and given new life. "There are hundreds of ships like the Phoenix sitting in scrapyards," Jake said. "Good ships that just need someone to believe in them. I want to find them and bring them back." The Admiral understood immediately. A restoration program. Find abandoned ships and turn them into a fleet. Exactly, not just human ships. Any ship that has potential. Altarian, vegan, Centauri. It doesn't matter who built them originally. What matters is that they can fight when needed, Admiral Chun smiled. "That's an interesting idea, but you would need resources. Funding, equipment, crew members." "I have crew members," Jake said. He looked at Lisa, Ben, and Danny. "These people helped me restore the Phoenix. They believe in the project." Over the next few weeks, Jake worked with Admiral Chun to develop his plan. The Earth Defense Force agreed to sponsor the restoration program. They would provide funding and equipment. In return, the restored ships would serve as part of the Defense Force when needed. The program was called the Restoration Squadron. Jake would be its commanding officer with the rank of captain. His mission was to find abandoned warships and restore them to active service. The Phoenix became the flagship of the new squadron. But first, she needed major repairs. Earth Defense Force engineers worked alongside Jake to rebuild his ship. They installed modern human weapon systems. They upgraded her shields and armor. They gave her a proper military-grade computer system. But they kept Jake's modifications too. The mixed human and alien technologies that had seemed so strange to other engineers. Admiral Chun recognized that Jake's unconventional methods were actually strengths. "Don't change what works," the Admiral told his engineers. "This ship has already proven herself in battle." The restoration took 3 months. When it was finished, the Phoenix was more powerful than she had ever been. Her weapons were state-of-the-art. Her shields could withstand heavy enemy fire. Her engines had been fine-tuned for maximum performance, but she was still recognizably the same ship that Jake had bought at auction. She still had the scars from her original battle. She still had Jake's jury-rigged repairs mixed in with the new systems. She was a symbol of what humans could accomplish when they refused to give up. Jake's crew had grown during the restoration. Lisa Chun became his executive officer. Ben Rodriguez took charge of communications and electronics. Danny Walsh became the chief engineer. They were joined by other humans who had heard about the project and wanted to be part of it. Captain Sullivan also joined the squadron. She brought her ship, the Endeavour, and her experienced crew. Other Earth Defense Force officers volunteered. As well, soon Jake had enough people to crew multiple ships. The squadron's first mission was to the Vega system. Intelligence reports indicated that several abandoned ships were drifting in the outer asteroid belt. Jake led a small fleet to investigate. They found more than they had expected. 3 Altarian frigates, 2 Centauri destroyers, and 1 massive Orion battlecruiser. All of them had been damaged in various battles and left to drift in space. Some had been floating dead for decades. Jake studied each ship carefully. Not all of them were worth saving. One of the Altarian frigates was too badly damaged to repair. But the other ships had potential. The Orion battlecruiser was the most challenging project. It was twice the size of the Phoenix and had been built using completely different technology. But Jake could see the quality of its construction. With proper restoration, it could become the most powerful ship in the squadron. Work on the new ships began immediately. Jake divided his crew into teams, with each team responsible for one ship. He moved between the projects, helping solve problems and sharing techniques he had learned while restoring the Phoenix. The work was slow and difficult. Each ship presented unique challenges. The Centauri destroyers used quantum-based computer systems that were completely different from human technology. The Orion battlecruiser had armor made from a metal that human tools could barely cut, but Jake's crew had learned from their experience with the Phoenix. They knew how to mix different technologies. They understood how to make human and alien systems work together. Most importantly, they never gave up when faced with seemingly impossible problems. After 6 months of work, the first restored ship was ready for testing. It was one of the Centauri destroyers. Jake had renamed it the Resilience. Like the Phoenix, it was a mixture of original alien technology and human modifications. The test flight went perfectly. The Resilience handled beautifully and all her systems worked properly. Jake felt the same pride he had experienced when the Phoenix first flew. Another dead ship had been brought back to life. Over the next year, the restoration squadron grew rapidly. The Orion battlecruiser became the Defiant. The remaining ships became the Courage, the Honor, and the Victory. Each ship had its own mixed crew of humans and aliens who had joined the project. Jake stood on the bridge of the Phoenix and looked out at his fleet. 6 restored warships flying in perfect formation. Ships that had once been considered worthless junk were now among the most advanced vessels in the galaxy. The squadron had already fought in several battles. Pirates, raiders, and hostile aliens had all learned to fear the sight of Jake's mixed fleet. The ships fought with the desperation of vessels that had been given a second chance at life, but more importantly, the squadron had proven a point. They had shown the galaxy that cooperation was possible. Human and alien crews worked side by side on every ship. Technologies that had never been combined before were now working together perfectly. Jake's crazy idea of buying a rejected warship had become something much larger. It had become a symbol of hope and possibility. It had shown that anything could be restored. If someone was willing to work hard enough, the Phoenix led her squadron toward their next mission. In the distance, Jake could see a distress signal from a merchant convoy under attack. More people needed help. Jake smiled as he gave the order to engage. The Phoenix and her sister ships raced toward battle. They were no longer just restored warships. They had become legends. From the ashes of the old, they had forged the future of the new.